Hello, and welcome to our first recorded chapter PowerPoint presentation. This is on Chapter 1, the history, structure, and content of the U.S. Constitution. And just briefly before we get started, the purpose for these recordings is, number one, to help you understand the material better. Some of the material in this course can get a little complicated. And what I do is I highlight the material that I think is important, for testing purposes, and also material that may be particularly difficult to understand without at least some reinforcement. And that's why every week or whenever we start a new chapter, we will have these PowerPoint presentations. This one is actually going to, chapter 1 is going to be 2 parts. I don't want to make these videos too long, so I will divide chapter 1, and probably most of the chapters this semester will be in at least 2 different parts, just to keep the video sessions shorter. So without further ado, let's get into the material for chapter 1, at least for the first part. And this course is based on the U.S. Constitution. And in order to do well in this course and to understand the material, you need to understand the Constitution. And to understand the Constitution, it's always helpful to understand something if we know the history and how it came about. And that's particularly important when it comes to the Constitution. Without knowing the reasons why certain things are in the Constitution, it may not make a lot of sense. And that's the purpose of chapter 1, is to give you a history of the Constitution, the structure of the Constitution, and why it is formed that way. And the first thing I want to do is just quiz you a little bit and ask you, what type of government system do we have in our country? Now, most people are tempted to say that we live in a democracy, and that is true. We do live in a democracy. However, that is not the government system that we have. The government system that we have is called federalism. So what is federalism? We are a federalistic society. And what the heck does federalism mean? And federalism is a system of government in which the same territory is controlled by 2 levels of government, or 2 different governments. So it's one territory that is governed by 2 different governments. And that is our system here in this country. All of our states are governed at a national level. So all these 50 states of ours, every single one of them is governed by the federal government. Under the federalism theory, each state is also governed by the state government. So every state, for example, Massachusetts, like every one of the other states, has a state government, the Massachusetts state government. So every state is governed by the federal government and also governed by the state government for that state. And that is what qualifies as federalism, because it's one territory being governed by 2 different governments. And of course, I think the natural question that would come up is, doesn't that cause confusion? If one territory is governed by 2 different governments, there must be some confusion there. And what do we do when one government wants to do one thing and another government wants to do another? And that's where our Constitution comes into play. At least one of the aspects that our Constitution addresses. And this, we will go over this in a little bit more in detail later on, but this is just a quick view. So under federalism, you have national or federal government, you have state government, and under each one are the powers that the Constitution gives the national government and the powers it gives the state governments, and then it gives the powers that both have. So for example, to regulate business within the state, only the state can do that. The federal government cannot pass laws or in other ways try to regulate state businesses within the state. That is strictly left for the states under our Constitution. So with federalism, there is going to be some conflict. There is going to be some crossover, some shared powers that they have. But then individually, nationally, and state level, they have their own set of powers that are listed and enumerated in the Constitution. So why do we have this crazy idea of federalism? Why did we choose this? It was the first type, this was the first type of government system, this federalism, that anybody had ever seen before. And our forefathers, as brilliant as they were, extremely brilliant to come up with this idea. And there was a reason why they wanted to have this federalistic society as opposed to just one government ruling everything. And you're going to see this recurring theme throughout the semester, and particularly in this chapter and the next chapter. You'll see this theme over and over. And it's really important that you understand this theme and this concept, because it's really what brought us to where we are today. And it's really what made us the country that we are. So this recurring theme that you're going to hear me say over and over, probably get tired of me saying it, but we saw firsthand the effects of one central government having too much power. When I say we, I mean the colonies. We as a society, we came from England. We came over from England and we started the 13 colonies here. Now, individually, we all have different backgrounds. My ancestors are not from England. So when I say we, I don't mean individually, I mean collectively as a country, we came from England and we were colonies under England. So we were ruled by England under King George. And King George was not a nice person, to say the least. And a lot of the rule that he provided over the 13 colonies really brought us to the brink of wanting to revolt against England. For example, no taxation without representation. They were barging into our houses without warrants. They were seizing our property. They were seizing us. Generally, they were pretty much doing whatever they wanted to us. Again, us, I mean the colonies. To the point where we said that we no longer want to be part of England. We are all set with being part of England. And when we became our own country, eventually, we said that we never want to have that happen again in this country. So in order to avoid one government from being too powerful, they created this federalism. Therefore, because there's two governments and there's checks and balances, that one government checks and balances the other government, the federal central government, and sometimes federal government is called the central government, this central government cannot become too powerful. And that is the system that we designed. That's what federalism is. And the reason why we have federalism is we do not want a federal or a central government to be too powerful. We wanted the central federal government to stay out of our business and let the states run the states. And that was the idea behind federalism. And again, that's a recurring theme that you're going to see over and over, is that this very strong distrust of a central and too powerful government. And everything we did in this Constitution that we have, when we formed our country, everything we did was with that theory of we do not want our federal / central government to be too powerful. And so we created the Constitution. And how did we create this document called the Constitution? And there's 4 steps that we went through to create the Constitution. So the first thing we did was we told England that we no longer want to be part of England. We want to be our own country. We are declaring our own independence. And on July 4th, this is why we have the 4th of July, on July 4th in 1776, the 13 colonies signed, you guessed it, the Declaration of Independence. And this was a document, not the Constitution, this is separate from the Constitution. This was a document where we said to England, we are proclaiming our independence. We are no longer part of England. We are forming our own country called the United States of America. So you can go to hell, England. We are going to form our own country. Now, as you can imagine, that England did not take that too well. And England said, no, slow down there, colonies. You are part of our country, whether you like it or not, and we are not going to let you become independent. And we countered that by going to war, and that is the Revolutionary War. We went to war with England because England would not let us form our own country. So we had to fight for our independence. We had to fight for our country. And we had to fight for the beliefs that we have. We had to fight for what we held so strong that we put it in the Constitution. So never forget that. Never forget that lives were lost for the freedom that we have today, and for the idea that the central government cannot be too powerful. So the American Revolutionary War lasted from 1775 to 1783, roughly 8 years, a little longer. And that's a long time for a war. And certainly back then, with the conditions, that was a very long time. So the suffering and the loss was tremendous. But the colonies would not give up. They wanted their independence so bad. They wanted to get out from under England so bad that they fought this deadly war for 8 years. And as they were fighting the war, they realized that if we're going to fight a war, and we've got these 13 colonies, as much as we hate a central government, we do need at least some type of central government, because we need to organize. We need to get organized. If we're going to fight a war, if the 13 of us, the 13 colonies are going to fight a war with England, then we need to get organized. And the way to get organized was at least to have some type of central government. And that is when we created the Continental Congress. So we created this Continental Congress as a central federal government. It's the first one we had. But we still had a very strong apprehension from having a central government. We hated a central government. We knew it was necessary in order to fight a war, to be organized and to collectively fight the war. So we needed some type of central government. So having this necessary evil, they decided that we're only going to give that central government limited powers. We hate a central government so much. We know we need it for the war. So the only powers we're going to give this central government are the powers necessary to fight the war. And that's all the powers our first Congress had, was the power to fight the wars. And that was it. They didn't have any powers to pass laws, to tax people. The Continental Congress, the only power they had was to fight the war. And who won the war? Of course, the colonies won the war. Otherwise, we would be speaking with a funny British accent right now. So we won the war. And now we won the war. So now what? Now we're our own country. We won. England surrendered and said, okay, we've had enough. You beat us. Go for it. Be your own country. So we became our own country. And when we became our own country, it became apparent that we still needed a centralized government to run us as a country. We had 13 colonies independently, but we also needed a centralized government to help run the colonies as a country. And we didn't like it. We hated centralized government, but we knew it was necessary. So we wrote the Articles of Confederation. And these Articles of Confederation were very limited. It gave very limited power to this central government, this federal government that we created. And again, it's that theme that we did not want a central government to be too powerful. And there was a strong distrust of a strong central government. So this government that we created, once we became our country and the war was over, we realized, okay, the war's over, but we still do need a central government. As much as we hate it, as much as we do not want a central government, we realize that we do need one. So, but because we have one, we're going to limit the power the central government has. And so the only powers we gave this central government, the chief function anyway, that the national, federal, central government, whatever you call it, is fine, was to run foreign affairs, not domestic issues. So the federal government, the central government, the only powers they had through the Articles of Confederation, the only powers that they had was to run foreign affairs. We're a country now, and we're going to be dealing with other countries. So we need a central government to deal with other countries as us as one country. They had no powers to run domestic issues, and by domestic issues, we mean state issues. So this federal government that we created only had the power to run foreign affairs, and they had no powers to run state affairs, domestic issues. And then step 3 is we needed more. We needed, the Article of Confederations were a good start, but we were now a nation and we knew we needed more. We knew we needed to function as a nation, to function as a country, and not just function as 13 separate states. And again, in order to do that, we needed more of a central government. So in 1787, a resolution was called to reconsider the Articles of Federation. So really the Articles of Confederation was really the first draft of the Constitution. It wasn't the Constitution yet, but it was the first form, it was the first written document that we had as this country that gave central government some powers. So we needed to reconsider those. Therefore, we had a constitutional convention in Philadelphia. And this constitutional convention lasted 4 months. So the Constitution was not passed overnight. This lasted 4 months, and it was presided over by, this is a great test question. It was presided over by George Washington. So George Washington, he wasn't president yet. He was a general. He had fought the war as the lead general. And after the war, when we had the Constitutional Convention, we chose George Washington to preside over the Constitutional Convention. And then we have the father of the Constitution. And the father of the Constitution, this is another great test question, is James Madison. And there's a reason why we call him the father of the Constitution. So George Washington presided over the Constitutional Convention, and James Madison is known as the father of the Constitution. And he recognized that now that we're a nation, we needed a full constitution. And he recommended preserving the idea of separating the powers of the national government into 3 branches. This was his idea, and this is why he's considered the father of the Constitution. Because as we're going to learn, our Constitution divides our federal government into 3 parts. So step 4 was to ratify the Constitution. We had the Constitutional Convention. Now everybody has to approve it. So it had to be, we drafted the Constitution, but it still needed to be ratified by the states. But that was not easy. There was very, very strong divided public sentiment on the Constitution. It took a lot for the people to finally come around and agree to the Constitution. And why? Well, it's that theme again, was that many thought that this new Constitution gave too much powers to the federal government. They were like, time out. We just went through hell with England. We do not want a federal government that's too powerful. We understand we need a federal government, but this Constitution that you created, it gives the federal government too much power. You need to pull back and rein in some of that power that you gave the central government in the Constitution. And in order to get the Constitution passed as written, as the James Madison and everybody had wrote it in the Constitutional Convention, which by the way was very, very heated. That Constitutional Convention, they almost came to blows many times. It was a very heated debate. So we had these Federalist Papers, and it was really an ad campaign. They took out ads in newspapers. People read the newspapers back then. And these ads really were these long documents called the Federalist Papers. And they went into detail on why this Constitution is good for us, why the powers we gave the central government are necessary. And these are the measures we took to limit their powers. So again, there was a fear of giving too much power to the central government. And when we wrote the Constitution, it was their job now to convince the people that we understand your fear of too much power for a central government, but we built in all these protections in our Constitution to protect us from an all too powerful central government. And in order for the Constitution to go in effect, then we needed 9 states to ratify it, which would be 2/3. There were 13 states, so 2/3 would qualify as ratification. And after much heated debate, it was finally ratified on July 2nd, 1788. It's also a fun date to know. All but 2 states voted to ratify. Rhode Island and North Carolina refused to ratify, refused to vote to approve the Constitution. And the other 11 states said, okay, if you don't ratify, then we're going to consider you not part of this country, and we're going to put tariffs or taxes on anything that you want to import or export from either in or out of your state. And after that, Rhode Island and North Carolina saw the light, and they voted, and it became a unanimous decision to ratify the Constitution. And the Constitution went into effect on September 13, 1788. So some fun facts for you to know, not just to impress people at parties, but to know for exam, is that the United States Constitution went into effect September 13th, 1788, and that Rhode Island and North Carolina were the last 2 to vote to ratify the Constitution. So that brings us to the Constitution itself. And again, this theme, I know you're probably getting tired of hearing it by now, but you really need to understand it and to appreciate it. So in order to prevent the central government from having too many powers, in the Constitution, we built in all these protections. And these articles are what make up the Constitution. So there's 7 parts, the articles. So there's 7 articles in the Constitution. And the solution that we had, at least one solution that we had, that prevented the central government from having too much power, was to break that central government up into 3 branches. We've got this central government. Now we're going to break it up. We're going to divide it into 3 equal parts called the branches. The 3 branches were created under the first 3 articles of the Constitution. There's 7 articles, and the first 3 create the 3 branches of the federal government. Branch number 1 is the legislative branch. Branch number 2 is the executive branch. And branch number 3 is the judicial branch. And you can see the little cartoon here. It's a 3-headed monster. So it's one monster, but it's broken up into 3 parts. And that is how our government is. And that is how, or the major way, really, we decided to limit and to prevent the central government as a whole from becoming too powerful. Each branch is not more powerful than the other branch. And each branch serves as checks and balances for the other branches to make sure they don't become too powerful. Brilliant idea on the part of our forefathers. Nobody had ever thought of this before. They recognized we do need this central government. What are we going to do to prevent it from becoming too powerful? Let's get the 3 branches. Let's break it up into 3 branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. And it was designed so that one branch does not have more power than the other branch. They have equal power. They have different responsibilities, but equal power. And it helps keep the federal government from becoming too powerful over the states. This was our goal. We did not want that. We did not want it to become too powerful. And this was the main solution that we had to prevent that from happening. So let's take a look at the legislative branch. Article 1 of the Constitution creates the legislative branch. If you read the Constitution, you go to Article 1. This is where the legislative branch is created. Better known as Congress. You can call it Congress. That's perfectly fine. And we have what's called a bicameral Congress. Whenever you see bi indicates two. So we have a two-part Congress. So not only did we break the federal government up into three parts, we also broke the first part, the legislative branch, we broke that up even further into two additional parts. We have the Senate, and then we also have the House of Representatives. And collectively, their power is to make laws. This is what the legislative branch does. This is their power, is to make laws. You need to know that. Legislative branch, the power is to make laws. And again, we further divided the legislative branch up into Senate and to House of Representatives. The Senate alone can't pass a bill or a law. The House of Representatives alone can't pass a bill or a law. It either starts in the House or it starts in the Senate. It could start anywhere, and then both of them have to approve it in order for it to become law. So you can see the protections that we have in there. And that brings us to the executive branch. And what is the executive branch? It's found and created in Article 2 of the Constitution. And the executive branch is the president. It's the president in any office that answers under the president. Some of the executive branches are the FBI. So the FBI is actually part of the executive branch because the executive branch has the power to enforce law. So presidents cannot make law. The president, through his chain, through the structure of the executive branch, can enforce laws. That's the only power the executive branch has, is to enforce laws. They cannot create and make laws. And it's done through the different agencies that fall under the executive branch, that fall under the president, the FBI, the CIA. All these enforcement branches fall under the executive branch. And they have the power to enforce laws. So let's just test your knowledge a little bit and see what you know about the presidents. Who said, "Make America great again"? That's probably the easiest one you're going to get. And of course, that was now ex-president Donald Trump. Does anybody know what president would be able to say this? "My father was also president"? And that would be George Bush. His father, also George Bush, was president before him, was president after Ronald Reagan. And then Bill Clinton became president, and then George Bush became president. What president said, "I did not have sexual relations with that woman"? And that was Bill Clinton, and he was impeached because he was found to lie under oath about his sexual relations with Monica Lewinsky. Now we're getting a little tougher. Which president, ex-president, can say, "I am a former peanut farmer"? That was Jimmy Carter. His family owned peanut farms in Georgia. down south. Which president was a former Hollywood actor? Happens to be my favorite president. Ronald Reagan was a former actor in the 50s. In the 40s and 50s, he was a pretty famous actor. And then in the 60s, he started to become political. And at one point, he was actually even the governor of California, and then eventually became the president of the United States. He was a two-term president. And finally, does anybody know what president famously or infamously said, "I am not a crook"? And that was Richard Nixon, who was impeached, and he left office disgraced because he was found to, not himself, but hired people. If you ever heard of Watergate, and this is where the term gate comes from. This is why we put gate after everything whenever there's some type of controversy. Deflategate, anytime there's some type of controversy, we put gate after it. It's because it comes from Watergate. And Watergate was a hotel in Washington that the Democratic Party had. They had rented that for their convention, and people who worked for President Nixon broke in to the Watergate Hotel and looked at and stole documents. And somebody snitched, and that came to light, and it was this huge thing back in 1972, I believe, or 73. And Nixon ended up getting impeached for it. And he, maintained his innocence, but the evidence really showed otherwise. And that was called the Watergate scandal, because it was the Watergate Hotel. And now whenever there's any type of scandal, that's why you find gate after it. So this is our executive branch. And again, the executive branch has the power to enforce laws. Now, presidential elections. Let's talk about this for a little bit. How do we elect a president? Does the majority vote win? You should know by now, because of either classes you've had or watching the news in the last election, not the most recent one, but the one where Trump got elected, that the majority is not what counts. We have what's called an electoral college. So there's 538 electors, and whoever gets 270 wins the election. So why do we have this electoral college system and not a popular vote? And the reason is it ensures the entire country is represented, and not just the most populated states. So let's look at a graphic, and this will help explain it, at least demonstrate it to you. This was the Trump and Hillary Clinton election. This is the one where Trump won. Now, Hillary Clinton, she won the popular vote, and she's the states that are shaded blue. Now, each state has an X amount of electors. So you see California has 55 elector votes. So whatever candidate wins the popular vote in that state, they win the electoral college votes. So the popular vote does count, to a certain degree. It is very important, but the most important is the electoral college. So you can see where the states where Hillary Clinton won, shaded in blue, by numbers, is much less than what Trump won. Look at all the states that Trump won. Now, it just so happens that Clinton won the popular vote. She got the most votes because she won states that were very populated. And Trump won states, got votes from states that are not that populated. And the electoral college number is decided by how many people live in the state, how many voters there are. So New York has a ton, California, Illinois. So all these states with high numbers of electoral votes is because there's a very large populace. And the idea behind the Electoral College is to ensure that everybody has a say. Because if we went just by the popular vote in this election, look at all these states that voted for Trump. And this is not a political statement. This is not a political class. We will keep it politically neutral. So let's keep our feelings about certain presidents and presidential candidates out of it. We're just looking at strictly by the numbers. Look at all the states that Trump won. And look how few Clinton won. So if we went by the popular vote, we would see that the entire country is not really represented properly by going by the popular vote. And the fairest way that we thought to do that, to give these less popular states, to give them a say in the presidential election, is this electoral college system. And there have been 5 presidents that have won by the electoral college vote: John Quincy Adams, Rutherford Hayes, Benjamin Harrison, George Bush in 2000, and Donald Trump in 2016. All 5 of these lost the popular vote, not by much, but still more people voted for the other candidate than they voted for them. However, they won the electoral college vote. Again, that system is designed so that everybody has a say. It gives equal weight to those states that do not have a very popular, a very large population. And if you think about it, it really makes sense, because in, let's say, a state like Iowa, do you think in Iowa they have the same values and they have the same ideas of how to run Iowa and how to run the country are the same as in New York? No, it's not. So the minorities in the minority states, the ones with not very popular votes, this system allows them to have a say. And now let's get into the third and final branch of the government, and that is the judicial branch. And that's kind of easy. It's the judicial branch. But what powers do or does the judicial branch have? And judicial branch is created under Article 3 in the Constitution, and its powers are defined in Article 3. And the power of the judicial branch is to interpret the laws. So, and you can see now how these 3 branches interact with each other and how they keep each other in check. So the legislative branch, they make laws. The executive branch, they enforce it. And the judicial branch interprets what those laws mean. And that is really how our Constitution was developed and designed, with the idea, again, of not giving too much power to the central government. So let's look into the powers of our governments. And by powers of our government, we're going to look into the federal government and the state government. What powers do they have? And it's in the Constitution. So the Constitution divides the powers of the federal government and the state government in 3 ways. The Constitution spells out, tells us, these are the powers the federal government has, these are the powers the state has, and these are the powers that both have. So it lists or enumerates certain powers the federal government has. And then it also prohibits the state from exercising certain powers. So the Constitution will list, and it says, these are the powers the federal government has. And then another section of the Constitution says, These are the powers that the states do not have. And then everything else goes to the states. So whatever powers the federal government does not have, the states have. And you can see, now you can really see the idea behind of limiting the powers of the federal government and giving more powers to the states. That was the idea behind this, is here you are, federal government, these are your powers. States, this is what you can't do. Whatever is not listed in these first two, the states can do. So everything else goes to the states. So let's look at the federal government powers. The federal government can tax, they can borrow money, they can regulate commerce, they can declare war, they can coin money, raise and support an army and navy, they can make laws, and they have no other powers. Every other power goes to the states. Now you may be saying, you know what, that sounds good, but it doesn't sound too much like what we see today in our government. And unfortunately, it is not. Our forefathers, I guarantee you that the way our government is today, the power that our federal government has in our lives is the complete opposite of what they wanted. They wanted the federal government out of our business. They wanted the federal government out of the state's business to let the states run the states how they see fit. Because again, in Massachusetts, how they want to run Massachusetts is probably entirely different than how California wants to run California. So we don't need a central government telling us how to run our states. We need a central government to do these certain things, to tax us, to borrow money for the good of the country. But today, what we see is a central federal government that has a lot of power over us. And that is because of how they regulate commerce. And we will get into that later. So all of the powers go to the states. What can't the states do? The Constitution tells us the states cannot enter into treaties. They cannot coin money. They cannot do bill of attainders and ex post facto laws. And bill of attainders and ex post factos are after the fact laws, meaning if you did something yesterday that was perfectly legal yesterday, and today they make a law that prohibits that, they can't go back in time and say, well, it's illegal now, so we're going to charge you for what you did yesterday. So that's what bill of attainder and ex post facto laws are. And that's really about all the states are limited to, and they can do everything else the government can do, and then anything else that is not listed for the federal government. So the states have what we call sovereign powers, and sovereign means a government alone. So sovereign is a government, and the state's government powers can be found under the 10th Amendment. And we call these police powers. So you'll see the term police powers, and by police powers we don't mean the traditional police officer, law enforcement. What we mean by that is the powers for the states to run themselves. We call that police powers. And education, public safety, establish local government. And these are the powers that the states alone are supposed to have. But the federal government is not supposed to have powers. However, as I went into briefly before, in the Constitution is the Commerce Clause. And this is really, and I guarantee you that this is not why the forefathers created the Commerce Clause. They created it out of necessity because states have to interact financially with each other. So we needed something in the Constitution to allow for that. But this has been interpreted, unfortunately, to give the federal government a lot of powers in our personal business, in our personal lives, and how states should run their business. And that is exact opposite of what our forefathers wanted. So what we see today really, unfortunately, is a shell of what we went to war for, what so many people died for. They're so strong in their beliefs of not having this central power that they went to war and they died for it. You know, many families and brothers and fathers and really even civilians really died for this cause. And it's a shame that we got where we are today. So let's take a look just briefly at the Commerce Clause. And under the Commerce Clause, it's designed so that the powers of the state, while the federalist system is designed so that the powers of the states would be greater than the powers of the federal government. But through this Commerce Clause, we have found that the federal government is becoming more and more powerful than we wanted, more powerful than we ever really anticipated the federal government becoming that powerful. So this is a federalist system designed so that the states would have greater power than the federal government. The Commerce Clause that's in the Constitution has been interpreted to allow Congress, the federal government, to regulate just about everything. By regulate, we mean pass laws. Congress can regulate anything, that includes things and people, as long as it passes through interstate commerce and it's economically related. So that is why the federal government is really starting to stick its nose into states' business, and especially now with the internet, where it's very easy for interstate commerce. Again, interstate commerce, the Commerce Clause was really just developed to allow states to economically deal with each other and do business with each other. Unfortunately, it's also been expanded and interpreted to allow the federal government to pass laws as long as it's interstate and it's economically related. And that's why you'll see things like education, federal education laws. And you see a lot of things that, geez, what the heck is the federal government? What business do they have doing that? And whenever it's challenged and the federal government wins, it's because it's been interpreted that if it passes through interstate and it's economically related, the federal government can do it, which in my eyes, unfortunately, is not a good thing. And that's not a political statement. That is just, in my mind, factual. And anybody who studies history and studies the history of this country, you can clearly see that is not what we wanted. So in our Constitution, we have the Bill of Rights. And I'm going to end it there today, and we'll pick up part 2. We'll pick up right here at the Bill of Rights. And that video will be made available to you within a few days. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate. Contact me, email me, and I'm more than happy to help anybody. If you're having a difficult time with any of the material, please let me know. And we will see you next time.